There is a place the daylight leaves behind, not forgotten, never forgotten, but released, gently, the way a hand opens to let something precious go. As the sun dips below the tree line and the last amber threads of evening are drawn from the sky, this place does not go dark, it transforms. It has always been this way. Long before the first road was laid, long before the first map was drawn, this place existed at the edge of the known world, half water, half earth, entirely its own. A marsh, a wetland, a breathing, living, ancient thing that does not sleep when the rest of the world grows quiet. It only wakes more fully. Tonight we go there together. We will follow the mist as it rises from still water, silver and slow, curling above the surface like a secret being told in a language older than words. We will listen as the silence fills, not with emptiness, but with life, with the pulse of 100,000 small hearts, with the calls of creatures who have claimed the darkness, not out of desperation, but out of wisdom. We will meet the singers and the hunters, the patient ones and the restless ones, the ancient ones who have watched 10,000 nights exactly like this one pass over the reeds and the cattails and the dark tea-colored water. There is nothing to fear in this place. There is only the marsh, breathing slowly, moving gently, dreaming in its own deep way. And there is you, here, at the edge of wakefulness, just as the marsh stands at the edge of land and water. Let the mist rise. Let the first frog call out into the darkness. Let the water remember, as it always has, how to hold the night. Stillness settles. The marsh is ready. And so, quietly, so very quietly, are you. Chapter 1. The Threshold of Day and Night. Watch the light go. It does not vanish all at once. That is not the way of things here. The marsh has never been a place of sudden change. It is a place of gradual becoming, of one thing dissolving softly into another, the way watercolors bleed at their edges when the paper is still wet. The sun is low now, snagged in the uppermost branches of the bald cypress trees that ring the western edge of the marsh. Their bark is the color of old rust, their knees rising from the shallows like small monuments to patience. The light that filters through their canopy is amber and thick, almost tangible, and it falls across the water in long, broken ribbons that shift and shiver whenever a breath of wind moves through. This is the golden hour, and like all golden things, it does not last. Watch the light go. The sky above the open water is a canvas in slow transition. Amber at the horizon, warming to a deep apricot, then climbing into rose, and above that, a blue so soft and so dark it is already whispering of night. A single great blue heron stands motionless in the shallows at the marsh's southern end, its long neck folded into a graceful S, its pale yellow eye fixed on the water below. It has been standing there since mid-afternoon. It will leave soon, retreating to its roost tree at the edge of the upland forest, surrendering the marsh to those whose hours are just beginning. But for now, it stays, watching, the way the marsh itself watches, with a kind of ancient and unhurried attention. The reed warblers are the first to sense the change, their bright, chattering songs, which have filled the cattails and the bulrushes all afternoon in an unbroken stream of sound, begin to taper. First one voice falls away, then another. The gaps between their calls grow longer, like the pauses in a conversation when the words have finally been said and only the feeling remains. By the time the sun has fully left the cypress branches, the warblers are silent, tucked deep into the reeds, their small bodies still and warm. The red-winged blackbirds follow next. All day they have been declaratory, emphatic, their calls sharp and territorial, ringing out from the tops of the cattails like tiny trumpets. Now they descend, one by one, into the interior of the marsh, into the dense thickets of vegetation, where the darkness pools earliest and deepest. Their red epaulets disappear into the green and the brown. Their voices go quiet. The marsh breathes. There is a moment of near silence. It lasts perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps a minute. It is the pause between movements in a symphony, and like all such pauses, it is not empty. It is full of anticipation. The air holds it, the water holds it, even the mist, which is only now beginning to form at the surface, thin, almost invisible wisps of vapor rising from the warmth of the water into the cooling evening air. Even the mist seems to pause, to wait. Then the wood thrush sings. One long fluted phrase rising from somewhere in the trees at the eastern edge of the marsh. It is a sound of extraordinary beauty, liquid and clear and resonant, a sound that seems to carry within it every evening that has ever been. The thrush sings 3 times, each phrase slightly different from the last, as though it is searching for the exact right way to say what the evening means. Then it, too, falls silent. And in the silence it leaves behind, something else begins. The air has cooled noticeably now. You can feel it. If you were here, standing at the edge of the boardwalk that runs along the northern rim of the marsh, you would pull your jacket a little tighter. The temperature has dropped perhaps 4 degrees in the last 20 minutes, and it will drop another 10 before midnight. The marsh responds to this cooling with its own particular kind of exhale. The mist thickens now, rising in earnest, low sheets of vapor drifting across the open water, blurring the reflections of the first stars that have appeared in the darkening sky above. The water is still, almost perfectly still. In the long open channels between the beds of emergent vegetation, the surface has taken on the quality of old pewter, flat, subtly luminous, holding the faint remaining light of the sky. A painted turtle, which has been basking on a half-submerged log since early morning, finally slides into the water with a soft splash. The ripples spread outward in perfect widening circles, and then the surface is still again. Water remembers. It remembers the turtle's weight. It remembers the afternoon's warmth, stored now in its depths. It remembers every creature that has moved through it today. The great blue heron wading in the shallows, the muskrat swimming its slow patrol along the edges of the cattail beds, the family of wood ducks that landed at midday in a clatter of wings and moved on by mid-afternoon. The marsh holds all of this within it, quietly, the way old places hold their histories. The light is nearly gone now. The western sky holds only a narrow band of deep orange along the horizon, above which the blue of evening has deepened to something approaching indigo. The first stars are not solitary anymore. They have been joined by others, and others still, the sky assembling itself into its nightly pageant above the open water of the marsh, which mirrors it back perfectly, star for star, in the stillness below. The great blue heron makes its decision. With a slow, deliberate unfolding of enormous wings, it lifts from the shallows, a prehistoric silhouette against the last light, and climbs, heavy and unhurried, toward the tree line. Its slow wing beats carry it away, and the sound of them fades, and the marsh receives its departure with the same equanimity with which it receives everything. Stillness settles. Now, the marsh belongs to the night, and the night, it turns out, has been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. The mist is rising freely now, no longer wispy and tentative, but a true rolling presence just above the surface of the water. In the channels between the vegetation, it lies in smooth, luminous layers, almost glowing with the faint light of the risen moon, still low on the horizon, still orange-tinged from its passage through the denser atmosphere at the edge of the earth, but climbing steadily, lending the marsh a pale, silver-edged beauty that the daylight hours never quite achieve. The cattails stand in silhouette against this light, their dark cylindrical seed heads, those distinctive brown clubs that give the plant its common name, are perfectly still in the calm air. The bulrushes sway almost imperceptibly in some breath of wind, too gentle to feel. At the water's surface, the emergent stems of the arrowhead plant cast thin, wavering shadows in the moonlight. Everything is waiting. The temperature continues to drop. Across the surface of the marsh, the moisture in the air condenses and falls, and piney droplets gather on every horizontal surface, on the waxy upper side of a lily pad, on the outstretched wings of a damselfly clinging to a reed stem, on the smooth back of a painted turtle resting just below the surface in the shallows. The marsh glistens. And then, from somewhere deep in the cattails, from somewhere so close to the water that it might almost be in the water, a voice rises. It is small. It is high-pitched. It is, at first, just one. A single spring peeper calling out into the enormous darkness with a clarity and a confidence that seems, in this stillness, almost miraculous. Peep. A pause. Peep. Another pause, slightly shorter. Peep. Peep. And then, as though the first voice was a signal, a permission granted, the marsh erupts. Not all at once, not in an instant, but in a cascade, a rolling wave of sound that moves through the cattails and the bulrushes and across the open water and back again. Spring peepers by the dozens, by the hundreds, each one adding its voice to the rising chorus, the individual calls blurring and weaving together into something that is no longer a collection of small sounds, but a single, immense, living sound, the voice of the marsh itself, finding its nighttime register. It fills everything. It fills the air above the water. It fills the spaces between the reeds. It echoes off the surface and rises into the sky. It reaches the tree line at the marsh's edge and returns, slightly softened, from the far side of the open water. And underneath it, supporting it, undergirding it, like the bass note in a chord, a bullfrog begins its deep, resonant call from somewhere near the center of the marsh. Jug-a-rum, jug-a-rum. The night has found its voice. The marsh breathes. And it will breathe like this, singing, calling, alive with sound and purpose and ancient, unceasing motion, until the sky begins, many hours from now, to lighten once again at its eastern edge, and the march of the night finally, gently, turns toward morning. But that is a long way off. There is so much to hear yet, so much to see and to know and to wonder at, here in this place where the darkness is not an ending, but a beginning. The threshold has been crossed. The night marsh opens before us, mist-wreathed and full of voices. Water remembers. We need only listen. Chapter 2. The Amphibian Chorus. Listen. Do not try to separate the sounds yet. Do not try to count the voices or name the singers. Simply listen, the way you would listen to rain, not to any single drop, but to all of it at once, the whole of it, the great and generous pour of it. This is the Amphibian Chorus, and it is one of the oldest sounds on earth. Long before there were birds to sing at dawn, long before there were wolves to howl at the moon, long before anything with warm blood had learned to make a sound at all, there were amphibians calling out into the darkness above ancient swamps and shallow seas, using sound the way they have always used it, as a bridge between one creature and another, cast out across the darkness in the hope that something, somewhere, will answer. The marsh is full of that hope tonight. Begin now to separate the voices. It takes practice. the way learning to see individual instruments in an orchestra takes practice. But once you learn to hear them, you cannot unhear them. The chorus resolves slowly into its component parts, and each part tells its own story. The highest voices belong to the spring peepers. They are astonishing creatures for their size, barely an inch long, smaller than a thumbnail, pale brown or gray, with a distinctive dark X marked across their backs. You would walk past a dozen of them without seeing a single one. But their voices are enormous, disproportionately, almost comically large for their tiny bodies. Each call is a clear, high-pitched whistle, rising slightly in pitch at its end, and at close range it can reach nearly 90 decibels, louder than a passing motorcycle, produced by a creature you could lose in a teaspoon. They call because they must. Spring peepers, like all frogs, rely on sound to find their mates. The males have been here since the ice at the marsh's edge melted for the first time in late winter. They arrive early, before almost any other species, their presence in the shallows a reliable signal that spring has truly come. Each male has claimed a small territory in the emergent vegetation, a particular stem or root cluster from which he broadcasts his call into the night, advertising his fitness, his vitality, his readiness. The females arrive later, moving through the chorus with the deliberate, evaluative calm of those who have the luxury of choice. They listen, they compare, they move toward the calls that satisfy something deep and instinctual within them, calls that are slightly faster, slightly louder, slightly more consistent than the rest. The marsh breathes. The green frogs add a different register to the chorus, a lower, more percussive sound, like the plucking of a single loose banjo string. Boing. A pause. Boing. They are larger than the peepers, these green frogs, 3 to 4 inches long, bright green or bronze along their backs, with a distinctive ridge of skin running down each side. They occupy the margins of the open water, half in and half out, their golden eyes at the surface, and they call with a kind of casual authority, as though they know they do not need to shout. The bullfrogs need no introduction. You have already heard them, that deep, carrying, almost bovine call that seems to resonate in the chest as much as in the ears. Juggarum, juggarum. The bullfrog is the largest frog in North America, and its call is the largest sound in the marsh's nightly repertoire. A dominant male bullfrog has been holding his territory at the center of this open water for 3 summers running. He is enormous, nearly 8 inches from snout to rump, and when he calls, the smaller males near the margin of his territory fall briefly silent, as if in acknowledgement of something older and larger than themselves. Water remembers. And then there are the American toads. They are not frogs, strictly speaking. The distinction matters to them, if not always to us. And their call is entirely unlike the peepers, or the green frogs, or the bullfrogs. It is a long, sustained trill, musical and almost ethereal, rising from the shallower areas at the marsh's edge where the toads have gathered in the early weeks of the breeding season. Each trill lasts anywhere from 4 to 20 seconds, and multiple males often call simultaneously, their trills overlapping and interweaving in a way that seems less like competition and more like conversation. The American toad's trill is produced by a vocal sac, a balloon of skin beneath the chin that inflates with each call, amplifying the sound and giving it that round, resonant quality. Watch a calling toad in the beam of a careful red-filtered light, and you will see the sac expand and contract with each breath, the toad's whole small body shuddering with the effort and the urgency of the call. All of this, the peepers and the green frogs and the bullfrogs and the toads, is happening at once, simultaneously, in overlapping layers of pitch and rhythm that seem at first to be undifferentiated noise. But there is order here. There is, in fact, a remarkable sophistication to the arrangement. Each species calls at a different frequency. This is not coincidence. It is the result of millions of years of acoustic competition, of natural selection steadily fine-tuning each species' call until it occupies its own distinct sonic bandwidth, its own channel in the nightly broadcast, minimizing interference with its neighbors. The spring peepers call high, the green frogs call mid-range, the bullfrogs call low. The toads fill a different dimension altogether with their sustained trills. And somehow, within this layered soundscape, each species' females can find and evaluate the calls of their own males, filtering out the rest. Stillness settles. Between the calls, in the brief spaces where one voice pauses and another has not yet begun, you can hear other things. The quiet lap of water against a reed stem, the distant splash of something entering the water from the bank, the soft, dry rustle of a cattail leaf in a breath of air. These small sounds are the mortar between the stones of the chorus, holding everything together, reminding you that the sound is not separate from the place, but part of it, inseparable from the water and the mist and the moonlight. By midsummer, the chorus will change. The urgency of spring breeding fades as the season deepens. The spring peepers, having mated, retreat from the open edges of the marsh into the surrounding woodland, where they will spend the rest of the summer in a kind of quiet anonymity, hunting insects in the leaf litter and the understory vegetation. Their voices will no longer fill the marsh. The American toads will follow, dispersing into the upland areas around the wetland. What remains is slower, sparer. The green frogs will still call on warm nights, that single plucked string note drifting across the summer water, and the bullfrog will maintain his vigil at the center of the open water until the nights begin to cool in autumn. But the great, overwhelming, all-encompassing chorus of spring, that phenomenon which fills the night air with sound so thick it seems almost physical, will not come again until next year. This is why we stay with it now. This is why we listen. Because this chorus is not merely sound. It is time itself made audible. It is the turning of the season rendered in biology, broadcast across the water by 100 small creatures who carry within them the ancient imperative to continue, to perpetuate, to send their voices out into the darkness and trust that the darkness will answer. The marsh breathes. In an hour, the chorus will reach its peak, a wall of sound that surrounds and envelops, that fills not just the ears, but somehow the entire body, vibrating in the sternum, humming along the edges of consciousness. If you were here, if you were lying in a canoe, drifting slowly in the moonlit water among the lily pads and the mist, you might find it almost impossible to remain fully awake. That, perhaps, is the point. The marsh has been singing creatures to sleep for a very long time. Water remembers. Let it remember you, too. Chapter 3. The Fisher's Patience. Stillness is a skill. Not every creature possesses it. The spring peepers in the cattails cannot help but broadcast their presence. Their survival depends on being heard, on being found. The insects we will meet later in this night are similarly declaratory, their songs filling every available frequency of the evening air. But the birds who work the margins of the marsh in these dark hours have chosen a different strategy entirely. They have chosen silence. They have chosen patience. They have chosen the art of becoming, to whatever degree a living creature can, simply part of the landscape, another shadow among shadows, another silhouette among the reeds. They have chosen to wait. The black-crowned night heron arrived at the marsh's edge as the last light left the sky. It came on slow, rounded wings from the direction of the roosting colony in the white cedars, half a mile to the northeast, a community of perhaps 30 individuals who spend their days roosting in the dense canopy, sleeping in that light, vigilant way birds sleep, heads tucked into the warmth of their own feathers. The marsh breathes. Now, in the darkness, the black-crowned night heron is fully awake. It stands at the edge of the water in an attitude of profound and practiced stillness. It is a compact, stocky bird, quite unlike the tall, angular grace of its cousin, the great blue heron, with a thick neck, a heavy black and white head, adorned with 2 long white plumes that trail behind it like fine calligraphy, and eyes of a deep, luminous red that catch the moonlight and seem almost to glow from within. Those eyes are extraordinary instruments. The black-crowned night heron's retinas are packed with rod cells, the photoreceptors for vision in low light, to a degree that far exceeds the density found in daytime active birds. In conditions that would leave a human nearly blind, the night heron sees with clarity and precision. It sees the surface of the water. It sees the shadow of a small fish moving through the shallows below. It sees the barely perceptible disturbance in the water's surface that indicates a crayfish moving at the bottom. It sees everything it needs to see, and it waits.
This is the essential practice of the wading birds, this absolute, almost meditative stillness. The black-crowned night heron can stand without visible movement for 4, 5, 10 minutes at a time. Its breathing is slow and shallow. Its great red eyes move. That is the only motion, tracking something in the water below, with a concentration so focused it seems almost like a physical force. Water remembers. And then the strike. It happens so fast that the eye barely catches it. The neck, which has been folded into that deceptive S-curve, uncoils in a single explosive motion, a biological spring releasing all its stored tension in one directed instant, and the heavy bill punches through the surface of the water and closes around a small bluegill 3 inches long that had been hovering in the shallows, not quite far enough from the bank. The whole thing takes perhaps 1/3 of a second. The heron tilts its head back, repositions the fish, and swallows it in one smooth, practiced movement. Then it settles, resets its posture, and is still again. Waiting. The yellow-crowned night heron, where the marsh's southern regions are warm enough to support it, follows a similar practice, but with a different preferred prey. While its black-crowned cousin is an opportunistic generalist, fish, frogs, crayfish, large insects, the occasional small mammal, the yellow-crowned night heron is a specialist. It has developed a particular expertise in crustaceans, and its heavier, more powerful bill is adapted for crushing the shells of crayfish and crabs. On a productive night, a yellow-crowned night heron may consume dozens of crayfish, working the shallows methodically, moving a few steps, pausing, waiting, striking. Stillness settles. Not far from where the night herons work, in a different part of the marsh, where the water is slightly deeper and the vegetation clears to open channels, there is a green heron. It is perched on a low branch of a willow that leans out over the water. A small, hunched bird, intensely focused, dark greenish blue on its back, chestnut on its neck, with a rusty orange iris that catches the moonlight. The green heron is remarkable for many reasons, but perhaps the most remarkable thing about it is what it does next. Reaching down with its bill, it picks up a small fragment of bread, left perhaps by a visitor who fed ducks here in the afternoon, and holds it for a moment, as if assessing it. Then, with a precise and deliberate motion, it drops the fragment onto the surface of the water just below its perch, and waits. This is tool use. This is, in the full and considered sense of that phrase, a bird using an object as a means to an end, deploying bait to attract prey, then waiting for the prey to approach before striking. The green heron does this with a range of materials: feathers, insects, small sticks, bits of food.
It does not do it by accident or instinct alone. It has learned, and it applies what it has learned with evident intentionality. The small fish that rises towards the bread fragment on the surface has not long to consider its mistake. The marsh breathes. And somewhere, not on the water, but above it, following the line of the open channel that cuts through the heart of the marsh, something moves fast, very fast. A streak of color in the moonlight, blue and rust and white, accompanied by a sharp rattling call that cuts through the amphibian chorus like a stone through still water. The belted kingfisher. It does not pause, it does not perch to wait. The kingfisher's method is movement, rapid, precise aerial movement, hovering above the water with that distinctive head-down pose, the heavy bill pointed at the surface below, the wings beating fast to hold position against any breath of wind. The kingfisher sees down through the surface of the water, its eyes equipped with two foveae instead of one, and with a particular crystalline lens adaptation that compensates for the refraction of light at the water's surface, allowing it to judge depth and distance in a way that seems, from the outside, almost like magic. When it dives straight down, wings folding back at the last instant, hitting the water with a clean precision that barely disturbs the surface. It emerges almost immediately, beating hard back into the air, a small fish crosswise in its bill. It flies to a nearby perch, a dead snag overhanging the water, strikes the fish once against the wood to stun it, then swallows it head first. The rattling call sounds once more across the water as the kingfisher departs, following the channel toward the next likely pool.
Water remembers. What unites these birds? The patient night herons at the margin, the calculating green heron with its bait, the quick and spectacular kingfisher, is a relationship with stillness. Even the kingfisher, in its hover above the water, achieves a kind of stillness, the body motionless relative to its target, the wings a blur, everything else fixed with absolute attention on the dark surface below. To hunt in the marsh is to learn patience. It is to understand that the world does not always deliver what you need at the moment you want it. It is to learn in the most ancient and essential way that waiting is not the opposite of action. Waiting is its own kind of action, perhaps the deepest kind. The black-crowned night heron at the water's edge has not moved in 6 minutes. It is not sleeping. It is not resting. It is completely, profoundly, magnificently alive. Stillness settles, and the water below it holds its silver light, and the frogs continue their chorus in the cattails behind, and the mist drifts across the surface in slow, rolling waves, and the marsh holds all of it, the patience and the hunger and the extraordinary flash of the strike, with the same quiet, ancient equanimity it has always held everything. The night is still young. The marsh breathes. Chapter 4. The Hunt Beneath the Surface.
Go deeper now. Leave the surface behind, that bright reflective boundary between air and water, where the herons wait, and the mist drifts, and the moonlight lays its long silver roads across the stillness. Leave it above you, receding, the sounds of the frog chorus muffled now, and then dissolving entirely as you descend into a world that has its own rules, its own light, its own ancient and particular logic. This is the water world, the other half of the marsh. It is dark down here, not the dramatic total darkness of a sealed room, but a gradual, deepening, organic darkness, the color of strong tea, or of amber, or of polished mahogany. The water in a freshwater marsh is tinted by tannins and humic acids, the chemical byproducts of decomposing vegetation that leach from the accumulated centuries of plant material on the bottom. It is not dirty water, it is old water. It is water that has been doing its work for a very long time, and its color is the color of that work. The marsh breathes.
In the uppermost layer, just below the surface, thin threads of moonlight penetrate, shifting and wavering as the surface moves. They illuminate, briefly, the underside of a lily pad, pale and smooth and geometrically perfect. They catch the silver flash of a small school of juvenile bluegills moving in tight, synchronized formation through the water column, their scales catching the light and releasing it in quick, random sparks. They illuminate the trailing root systems of the floating plants, hanging down into the darker water below, like the hair of sleeping giants. Deeper, the light fails. A foot below the surface, then 2, the tea-colored water absorbs what little moonlight reaches it, and the world becomes one of sensation rather than sight. This is where the largemouth bass holds its territory. It is a large fish, nearly 3 pounds, 16 inches from the tip of its lower jaw to the fork of its tail, and it has occupied this particular stretch of water, this specific corridor between 2 beds of submerged aquatic vegetation for 2 full seasons. It knows this water the way you know a familiar room, every contour of the bottom, every submerged branch and root and rock, every current and eddy and thermocline. And right now, at this hour, in this darkness, the largemouth bass is hunting. Water remembers.
It does not hunt by sight, or rather, it does not hunt by sight alone. The water is too dark, the night too complete for vision to be the primary sense. Instead, the bass relies on its lateral line, a system of sensory cells running along each side of its body in a faint line from gill cover to tail, a line you can see clearly on any bass you might hold in your hand. These cells are extraordinarily sensitive to pressure changes, to vibrations, to the minute disturbances in the water column created by any moving object. A crayfish moving along the bottom 12 inches away creates a pressure wave that the lateral line detects with precision. A small panfish hovering in the water column nearby creates a different signature, a different pattern of pressure and movement that the bass reads and interprets as automatically and as unconsciously as you read words on a page. The bass moves slowly, unhurriedly. It has no reason to rush. At this hour, the marsh's nighttime shift of prey species is well underway. The crayfish, which spent most of the daylight hours tucked beneath rocks and debris on the bottom, have emerged into the open water. They move across the bottom in their characteristic back and forth scramble, claws extended, searching for the decaying plant material and small invertebrates that make up their diet. They are in turn the preferred prey of half the species in the marsh, and they are aware of this at some level, their antennae in constant motion, their stalked eyes swiveling to detect the approach of danger. They are not always fast enough. Stillness settles.
The northern pike holds itself differently than the bass. Where the bass moves slowly and methodically through its territory, the pike is a creature of extraordinary stillness. It hovers, motionless in the cover of submerged vegetation, its long torpedo-shaped body perfectly horizontal, its fins barely moving. It resembles, in this posture, a shadow or a stick or some piece of inert debris, anything but an apex predator at the peak of its readiness. The pike's hunting strategy is ambush. It waits, sometimes for a very long time, until something suitable comes within range. Then it erupts. There is no other word for it. The pike erupts from its cover in a single explosive burst of acceleration that covers the distance between predator and prey in a fraction of a second, the long body flexing in a powerful S-curve that propels it forward with a force disproportionate to its apparent stillness. The strike is bone-white teeth and forward momentum, and the closing of a trap that has been set patiently for the last 40 minutes. The pike does not miss often. The marsh breathes. Below the pike and the bass, on and in the sediment of the marsh bottom, there is a world of smaller hunters and hunted that is no less dramatic for its scale. The dragonfly nymph, the aquatic larval stage of the dragonfly, which will not take wing until late spring or early summer, is one of the marsh's most efficient small predators. It is a strange, flattened creature, mottled brown and gray to match the bottom sediment, armed with a prehensile lower lip that can extend from its body with shocking speed to seize prey. At night, the dragonfly nymphs are active, moving across the bottom in search of smaller invertebrates, hunting with a patience and methodical thoroughness that belies their small size. A single large dragonfly nymph may spend 2 years in the marsh before its metamorphosis. 2 years of hunting, growing, molting, hunting again. The tadpoles that throng the shallow, warm areas near the marsh's edges are both hunters and hunted. They graze on algae and decaying plant material with their small, file-like mouths, performing a function essential to the marsh's ecology, keeping the algae in check, recycling nutrients back into the water column.
But they are also, in enormous quantities, food for the dragonfly nymphs, for the small bass that work the shallows, for the herons above, for the water snakes we will meet later in this night. Water remembers. The bowfin is perhaps most ancient fish in this marsh. Ancient not just in the way all wild things are ancient, but genuinely, specifically, paleontologically ancient. The bowfin's lineage extends back over 100 million years to the Jurassic period, and it has changed remarkably little in all that time. It is a living fossil, a phrase that sounds dramatic, but is, in this case, simply accurate. The bowfin that holds its territory in the deepest part of this marsh, in the slow-moving channel near the culvert on the eastern side, is essentially the same animal that swam in the shallow seas and river deltas of the Mesozoic era. It breathes air if it needs to. It can surface and gulp atmospheric oxygen when the water's dissolved oxygen content falls too low, a capacity that allowed the bowfin's ancestors to survive in the oxygen-depleted waters of the ancient world, and that allows this individual to survive in the late summer marsh when the water is warm and oxygen poor. It is a large, muscular fish, olive brown and mottled, with a long, waving dorsal fin that gives it its name. And it hunts in the darkness with the efficient calm of something that has had a very long time to practice. Stillness settles. The gar is similarly ancient. The long-nosed gar, with its extraordinary elongated bill lined with needle-sharp teeth, is another survivor from the deep past, another creature that looks precisely like what it is, a design that worked so well it needed no revision. The gar moves slowly through the water, near the surface, rolling occasionally to gulp air into its gas bladder. It is often mistaken from above for a stick or a floating log, an impression it does nothing to dispel. When a suitable fish comes near, the gar does not lunge or rush. It pivots, slowly, bringing that long bill to bear, and then, with a sideways slash that is more the motion of a club than a strike, it stuns its prey and seizes it. In the water column, between the surface and the bottom, the smaller residents of the marsh are conducting the nightly business of survival with a thoroughness that would astonish if we could see it all at once. The leeches, those much maligned, extraordinarily effective swimmers, are moving through the water in their distinctive undulating motion, sensing the chemical signals that lead them toward potential hosts. The water beetles are active near the surface, carrying their air bubbles like portable diving tanks. The back swimmers are rowing their way through the dark water on their long hind legs, perfectly inverted, watching the surface above them for the silhouettes of insects that have fallen onto the water. The marsh breathes. Everything in this water is calibrated. Everything is positioned in response to everything else. The prey species have evolved behaviors and body shapes and coloration patterns in direct, ongoing dialogue with the predators that pursue them. The predators have evolved their senses, their strategies, their striking mechanisms in equal and opposite dialogue with the prey that sustain them. This is the marsh's underwater economy, a dark, tea-colored, perpetually negotiated balance of eating and being eaten, of hiding and seeking, of the slow accumulation of energy moving up through the food web from the decomposing plant material on the bottom to the invertebrates that process it, to the small fish that eat the invertebrates, to the large fish that eat the small fish, to the herons waiting at the surface above. Nothing is wasted, nothing is superfluous. The leeches and the tadpoles and the dragonfly nymphs and the crayfish and the bowfin and the gar and the largemouth bass are not separate stories. They are a single story, told simultaneously in every part of the water column at once. Water remembers. And the water holds them all. The ancient and the newly hatched, the predator and the prey, the quick flash of the striking bass, and the slow, almost geological patience of the bowfin at the edge of the deep channel, holds them in its dark, tannin-colored embrace, cycling their nitrogen and their phosphorus and their carbon through the endless metabolism of the marsh. Above the surface, the frog chorus continues. The mist drifts. The moon is higher now, its light cooler and cleaner. Down here in the dark water, the hunt goes on. It will go on all night. It has gone on in this marsh, or one very like it, for longer than we have words to measure. Stillness settles. Rest in that knowledge. Let the dark water hold you for a moment. Not the cold water you're imagining, but something warmer, something more like sleep itself. Dim and enveloping, and full of quiet, purposeful life. The marsh breathes below the surface, too. It breathes in water. Chapter 5. The Insect's Night Orchestra. Come back to the air now. Rise from the dark water, through the mist, into the night air above the marsh, and listen again, as if for the first time, to what surrounds you. You have been hearing it all along, beneath the frogs, beneath the water sounds, beneath everything. A continuous, layered, shimmering fabric of sound that seems to rise from the vegetation itself, from the cattails and the reeds and the grasses at the marsh's edge and the woodland beyond. It is higher pitched than the frog chorus. It is more consistent, more even, more like the sustained note of a stringed instrument than the call and response of the amphibians. This is the insect orchestra, and it is, in terms of sheer acoustic complexity and biological sophistication, the most remarkable sound you will hear tonight. The marsh breathes. The crickets are the foundation. Field crickets, ground crickets, tree crickets, dozens of species, each with its own particular call, its own frequency, its own temporal pattern. The cricket produces its sound through a process called stridulation. It raises its wings slightly and draws a file-like ridge on one wing rapidly across a scraper on the other. The resulting vibration is amplified by the wing surfaces, which act as resonators, and the sound is broadcast outward with remarkable efficiency. The calling rate of a cricket is not fixed. It varies with temperature, a fact so reliable, so mathematically consistent, that it has been codified as Dolbear's law. Count the number of chirps a field cricket produces in 13 seconds, add 40, and you have a close approximation of the turrent temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. The crickets are, in a sense, the marsh's thermometer. As the night deepens and the temperature falls, the rhythm of their calling slows, almost imperceptibly at first, then measurably, then unmistakably. By midnight, when the temperature has dropped another several degrees from where it stood at dusk, the cricket chorus will be slightly slower, slightly more deliberate, its tempo adjusted with the same inevitability as the cooling air itself.
Water remembers. The katydids add a different texture to the orchestra, a rougher, more complex sound than the cricket's clean pulse. The katydid's stridulation produces a sound that has been described as a rasp, a scrape, a shh, the sound that gave these insects one of their common names, for it sounds, to some ears, like the phrase Katy did, Katy didn't, repeated endlessly into the night air. Different species produce different variants. Some call in long bursts, some in short pulses, some in complex two-part phrases that seem almost conversational. The katydids in the vegetation at the marsh's edge, the broad-winged katydids in the shrubs, the false katydids in the taller grasses are all calling for the same reason the frogs called earlier and the crickets call now, to find a mate, to advertise their presence, to declare their fitness to the world and trust that the world is listening. It always is. Stillness settles. But it is not only sound that these insects contribute to the marsh's nocturnal life. Look up, above the open water, above the mist, in the space between the surface and the first stars, there is light. Not the moonlight, which is cool and steady and comes from above. Something else. Something warmer, something that appears and disappears, pulses and fades, drifts and rises and sinks again in rhythms too specific, too structured to be random. Fireflies, or lightning bugs, as they are known in much of the country, though they are neither flies nor bugs, but beetles, small and soft-bodied, with a light-producing organ in the lower abdomen that generates cold light through a chemical reaction called bioluminescence. The reaction involves a compound called luciferin, an enzyme called luciferase, oxygen, and ATP, the basic energy currency of all living cells. The result is light produced with an efficiency that human technology has never matched. Nearly 100% of the energy input converted to visible light, with virtually no heat produced as a byproduct. The marsh breathes. Each species of firefly has its own flash pattern, its own signature in the darkness, as distinctive as a fingerprint. The most common species in eastern North American marshes and meadows, the Big Dipper firefly, produces a long looping flash,
a J-shaped arc of light that lasts perhaps half a second. The male flies up and produces his flash at the top of the arc. If a female in the vegetation below finds his signal acceptable, she responds 2 seconds later with a single brief flash of her own. This exchange, the male's arc, the pause, the female's answer, is happening all around you. Dozens of these conversations are underway simultaneously, each one a tiny glowing negotiation between two small creatures, using light the way the frogs use sound, and the way all living things use whatever they have at their disposal, to reach across the darkness toward another. Water remembers. In the Great Smoky Mountains, not far from where the marsh's watershed begins, in the hills to the east, there is a species of firefly whose males synchronize their flashes. In the evenings of late spring and early summer, thousands of male synchronous fireflies gather in the forest and the meadows at the forest's edge, and they begin to flash, and slowly, over the course of several minutes, their individual rhythms entrain to each other. One by one, they fall into synchrony, until the entire forest pulses with light in unison. A flash, darkness, a flash, darkness. The effect is indescribable. It is one of the great natural wonders of this continent, a spectacle of biological coordination that requires no conductor, no signal, no leader. Just 10,000 small lives learning to breathe together. Here in the marsh, the fireflies are not synchronous. They drift and pulse in their individual rhythms, a scattered, wandering constellation of cold light above the mist, but they are no less beautiful for the randomness of their arrangement. They drift over the open water, attracted by the moisture and the abundance of the soft-bodied prey insects that emerge from the marsh each night. They drift among the cattails. They rise into the open air above the reeds and trace their slow, glowing arcs against the darkness of the sky. Stillness settles. Below and among the fireflies, other insects are moving through the night air above the marsh in numbers that would be staggering if we could see them all. Moths in dozens of species, sphinx moths, underwing moths, geometrid moths, tiny micro moths whose wings span less than a centimeter, navigating by the moon and the polarization patterns of starlight, seeking flowers for nectar, seeking mates, seeking the specific host plants on which they will lay their eggs. Midges swarm above the open water in dense, shifting clouds, males forming aggregations that females fly through to mate, a behavior so ancient it has been observed in fossils from the Cretaceous period. Mosquitoes, the marsh's most notorious residents, are out in force, navigating by the carbon dioxide plumes exhaled by the warm-blooded creatures near the water's edge, by the infrared heat signatures of the bodies they seek. Caddisflies and mayflies emerge from the water itself. The adults of species that spent their larval lives on the bottom of the marsh as aquatic nymphs, who now live their brief adult lives entirely in the air. The adult mayfly does not eat at all. It has no functional mouthparts. It has perhaps a single night or a few hours to find a mate before its short adult life ends and it falls to the surface of the water, spent, to become food for the fish below. The marsh breathes. The water surface, seen from below at this moment, would resemble a kind of inverted sky, littered with the struggling, dimpling bodies of insects that have landed on or fallen through the meniscus, each one creating a tiny crater of disturbance, each one sending ripples outward that overlap and intersect with the ripples of 100 others. The fish below see this. The surface is an information screen, and the information it carries, the specific pattern of disturbance created by a struggling caddisfly, the different dimple made by a water strider, the different signature of a drowning moth, is read and acted upon continuously all night by the bass and the bluegills and the perch that have spent the day in deeper water and risen now to work the surface. Everything is connected to everything. The moths that come to the marsh's edge to find nectar in the arrowhead flowers become food for the bats that navigate the same airspace in the same hour. The mayflies that emerge from the water become food for the nighthawks that sweep the air above the open water in the long summer dusks. The midges that swarm above the channel become food for the dragonfly adults that hunt them on the wing, and the dragonfly nymphs that spent the winter on the bottom of the marsh waiting for this season to emerge were themselves food for the largemouth bass which we met in the dark water below. Water remembers. The insect orchestra plays on. Its tempo is the temperature. Its key is the frequency of each species' particular stridulation, each precisely calibrated to avoid interference with its neighbors. Its rhythm is the calling rate of 10,000 small bodies, each responding to its own internal chemistry, its own mating urgency, its own biological clock ticking through the night. Above the marsh, the fireflies drift and pulse and negotiate their small, luminous conversations. The mist rises. The moon is well up now, laying its light across the water in a long, broken column that shimmers when a breath of wind moves through. The cricket chorus slows almost imperceptibly as the air cools another degree. Stillness settles. You are very far from the noise of the day here, very far from everything that presses and demands and insists upon your attention. The insect's orchestra asks nothing of you. The firefly's light requires nothing in return. The cricket's counting of degrees is not intended for you, and yet here you are, counted anyway, enfolded in the same temperature, the same darkness, the same slow passage of the night. The marsh makes no distinction. It holds you the same way it holds the midge and the mayfly and the katydid and the great drifting acre of mist above the open water. gently, without condition. The marsh breathes, and so do you. Chapter 6. The Reptilian Watchers. There are creatures in this marsh who were here long before the frogs began to sing, long before the first insect learned to stridulate, before the first bird learned to call, before the first warm-blooded creature opened its eyes in a nest somewhere. There were reptiles, moving through the warm, shallow waters of an ancient world, patient, efficient, extraordinary. They are still here. The marsh breathes. The northern water snake moves through the shallows at the marsh's eastern edge with a fluid, unhurried ease that belies the efficiency of its hunting. It is a heavy-bodied snake. Adult females can reach 4 feet or more, with a pattern of dark brown bands on a lighter background that blurs in the moonlight into a convincing approximation of the pattern of shadows and reflected light on the water's surface. It is, in its own way, as invisible as the night heron it shares this edge of the marsh with. The water snake hunts by chemical sense, its tongue flicking constantly, tasting the water and the air for the molecular signatures of frogs, small fish, crayfish, and by the heat-sensitive pits in its facial scales that detect the infrared radiation of warm bodies in the water nearby. It is not fast in the way the kingfisher is fast or the pike is fast. Its method is slow, deliberate penetration of the spaces where prey congregates, the margins of the lily beds, the edges of the cattail stands, the shallow muddy areas where frogs gather to call, and where small fish come to feed on the invertebrates stirred up from the bottom by their own movement. The water snake pauses at the edge of a stand of arrowhead plants, its head low and still, above the surface, its tongue working in rapid, delicate pulses. Below it, in the water, a small green frog is sitting motionless on a submerged stem, its chin at the surface, resting in the way frogs rest, not sleeping exactly, but held in a kind of suspension, alert in some deep physiological sense, even when the higher processing of its small brain is quieted. The frog becomes aware of the snake a fraction of a second before the snake strikes. It is enough, barely, for the frog to push off from its stem and launch itself into the deeper water in a single powerful kick. The snake's strike finds water where the frog was. It recoils, resets, and moves on without apparent frustration. This is not failure. This is the negotiation between predator and prey that has been going on between these two species for tens of millions of years, and the outcome of any individual encounter is less important than the overall balance it represents. Water remembers. In the deeper parts of the marsh, in the soft mud of the bottom, where the water is 3 feet deep and cool and dark, the snapping turtle rests. It has been here most of the day, resting in the way snapping turtles rest, which is not so much sleeping as a kind of minimal energy awareness, its metabolism slowed to a barely perceptible tick, its lungs supplemented by cutaneous respiration,
that allows it to absorb small amounts of oxygen directly from the water through patches of highly vascularized skin near its tail. At night, the snapping turtle becomes more active. It moves across the bottom with a slow, purposeful deliberateness, its massive head low, its hooked beak slightly open, its clawed feet pushing through the soft sediment. It is a scavenger as much as a hunter, and the marsh's night shift provides it with abundant opportunities. Carrion on the bottom, a dead fish, a drowned muskrat, the shed exoskeleton of a crayfish is detected by chemical sense and consumed with a methodical thoroughness that leaves nothing behind. But the snapping turtle also hunts. It takes fish when it can, moving with a surprising burst of speed when prey comes within range of that powerful neck, which can extend further and faster than its overall torpor might suggest. It takes frogs and waterfowl chicks and aquatic invertebrates and aquatic vegetation with equal equanimity. The snapping turtle is one of the marsh's most important ecological engineers, a scavenger and recycler that processes what would otherwise accumulate on the bottom, returning nutrients to the water column, keeping the system clean and cycling. Stillness settles. The painted turtle, the small, elegantly marked turtle that basked on the log all afternoon before sliding into the water at dusk, is resting now, on the bottom in the shallows, tucked into the soft mud, its metabolism slowed by the cooler water temperature. It will wait out the night here, patient as stone, and emerge to bask again when the morning sun warms the surface of the log it has claimed for its own. These are the ancient custodians of the marsh, the reptiles who have been here, in this role, in this relationship with this water, since long before the first human being looked out over a wetland and tried to put words to what they felt. They do not require our understanding. They do not seek our admiration. They simply continue as they have always continued in the great and quiet practice of being what they are. The marsh breathes. In the southern marshes, in the bayous and the coastal plain wetlands of Florida and Georgia and Louisiana and the Gulf states, the night belongs to another reptile entirely, a creature so perfectly adapted to the nocturnal life of the wetland that it seems at times less like an animal than like an expression of the marsh itself. The American alligator. It lies at the surface of the water, barely moving. Only the very top of its head is visible, the nostrils, the ridge above the eyes, the dome of the skull, everything else submerged, as still as a half-sunken log. And indeed, that is what it resembles from a distance, a piece of debris, a shadow, an irregularity in the surface. Its olive-black scales are invisible in the darkness. Its motionlessness is absolute. And then you look more carefully, and you see the eyes. When the light catches them, a flashlight beam, the swinging lantern of a passing boat, even the low, steady light of a full moon at the right angle. The alligator's eyes shine red-orange in the darkness. This is the tapetum lucidum, a reflective layer behind the retina that bounces light back through the photoreceptors a second time, giving the alligator's vision in low light an extraordinary sensitivity. What you see when you see those glowing eyes is the marsh's own light being returned to you. Water remembers.
The alligator is aware of you. It is aware of everything within a considerable radius, of the vibrations of your footsteps on the bank, of the chemical signals your body releases into the air, of the heat your warm body radiates into the night. Alligators are exquisitely sensitive to vibration. They detect it not through ears alone, but through sensory cells embedded in the scales of their face and jaws. Black dots arranged in precise rows along the upper and lower jaw that can detect the subtlest pressure wave in the water. A bullfrog calling 20 yards away creates a specific vibration pattern. A fish moving near the surface creates another. A large warm-blooded animal approaching the bank creates yet another. The alligator reads all of these continuously, automatically, filtering signal from noise with the efficiency of an instrument calibrated over 200 million years. Stillness settles. When the alligator bellows, you will know it. The bellow is the male alligator's territorial and breeding call, produced by resonating the body in infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, while simultaneously producing the lower frequency roar that is audible to us. The infrasound component causes the water around the alligator's body to vibrate visibly, droplets dancing on the surface in a phenomenon called the water dance or alligator water dance, a sight so extraordinary that those who witness it for the first time often do not fully believe what they have seen.
The bellow itself is deep and resonant, and carries across the water with a physical force that you feel as much as hear. A sound that engages something very old and very attentive in the mammalian nervous system, something that does not require thought to respond to. It is not a threatening sound, not in the context of the marsh's nighttime vocabulary. It is simply a declaration of presence, an announcement, a voice added to the marsh's chorus in the same spirit as the bullfrog's juggarum and the spring peepers piping, "I am here, I am here." The marsh breathes. The alligator is not a monster. Let that understanding settle as completely as the mist settles on the water. The alligator is an ancient keeper of the southern wetland, an apex predator whose presence regulates the populations of prey species, whose nesting activities create elevated, drier areas of ground within the marsh that become habitat for dozens of other species, whose movements through the vegetation maintain open water channels that would otherwise close in. The American alligator was once hunted nearly to extinction. Its recovery from a population of perhaps 1 million animals in the early 1960s to over 5 million today is one of the great conservation successes of the 20th century.
The marsh needed it back. It knew, in that way places know things, that the balance was wrong without the ancient keeper in the water.
Water remembers. And here, in the southern marshes, where the nights are warm and the stars hang low and thick above the open water, the alligator floats in its ancient stillness, its eyes carrying the reflected light of a world it has watched for 200 million years, waiting with a patience that makes even the night heron's stillness seem impetuous. The water moves around it in slow, barely perceptible currents. The frogs call from the edges of its territory, and it knows their calls, and it knows which ones indicate a large enough meal, and which ones do not, and it continues to float, and to wait, and to watch. The mist drifts across its back. The moon lays its light across the surface. Stillness settles. The marsh holds all of this, the water snake working the shallows, the snapping turtle moving across the soft bottom, the painted turtle resting in the mud, the alligator floating at the surface of the southern bayou like a dream of something ancient and necessary, holds all of it with the same quiet, generous, entirely untroubled acceptance with which it holds everything. These are not creatures to fear. The moon lays its light across the surface. Stillness settles. The marsh holds all of this, the water snake working the shallows, the snapping turtle moving across the soft bottom, the painted turtle resting in the mud, the alligator floating at the surface of the southern bayou like a dream of something ancient and necessary, holds all of it with the same quiet, generous, entirely untroubled acceptance with which it holds everything. These are not creatures to fear. They are creatures to wonder at. They are the oldest life in this place, and this place would not be what it is without them, would not be the breathing, layered, extraordinary living system that it is without their particular patience, their particular power, their particular and irreplaceable place in the web of this nighttime world. The marsh breathes, and the ancient ones breathe with it, slow and deep, and completely at home in the darkness. Chapter 7. The Marsh at Rest. Something changes in the darkness. You might not notice it at first. It is too subtle, too gradual, too much like all the other gradual changes that have been happening throughout this long night for you to pick it out immediately. But it is there if you are still enough to sense it. The darkness at the eastern edge of the sky has shifted almost imperceptibly from black to something that is almost black, but not quite. Not blue yet, not gray. Something without a precise name. The very first suggestion of a color that has not yet arrived. A presence felt rather than seen, like the warmth of a fire through a closed door. The night is turning.
The marsh breathes. It does not announce itself, this turning. The marsh makes no fanfare of the approaching day here. The transition from night to morning is not a dramatic event, but a slow, continuous dissolving, exactly the way the day dissolved into night so many hours ago at the other end of this long journey through the wetlands' dark hours.
The frog chorus, which has been the great constant of the night, the backdrop against which everything else has played out, the breathing of the marsh made sound, begins very subtly to change, not to stop, not yet, but to thin, the way fabric thins when it begins to wear. The individual voices not gone, but spaced a little further apart, the pauses between calls slightly longer, the overall density of the sound slightly reduced. The spring peepers are still calling, but there are fewer of them now. Some have withdrawn into the vegetation, their night's work done, their calling complete. The bullfrogs call on, those deep, resonant proclamations rolling out across the open water with the same authority they carried at midnight. But even the bullfrogs are calling less frequently, their intervals longer, their immense energy beginning to ebb as the temperature reaches its lowest point of the night, that deep cold hour just before dawn. The meteorologists call the thermal minimum, the still point around which the day and night revolve. Water remembers. The insects' orchestra has changed as well. The crickets are noticeably slower now. Dole bear's law at work, their calling rate adjusted precisely to the cooling air. The pre-dawn temperature somewhere in the low 50s, and the crickets counting it out faithfully. The katydids have largely fallen silent, their long night of calling complete. A few individual crickets can be heard now as individual voices, rather than as part of a wall of sound. A single field cricket calling from somewhere in the tall grass at the marsh's edge, its chirps measured and deliberate in the pre-dawn quiet. The fireflies are gone. They extinguished themselves gradually as the night deepened, first the ones over the open water, then those in the shrubs at the marsh's margin, and finally the last scattered ones in the woodland edge beyond, their cold light going out one by one, like candles at the end of a long evening. The sky above the marsh is now lit only by the stars and the moon, which has traveled well across the sky through the night's hours, and now hangs in the west, lower than it was, its light softer and more golden as it descends toward the tree line. Stillness settles. The night herons are calling now, short, sharp, barking calls as they lift from their feeding stations at the marsh's edge and begin to move back toward the roosting colony in the white cedars. One passes overhead, its silhouette low and compact against the star-filled sky, its wingtips nearly silent in the still air. It is heading home. The alligator in the southern marsh has moved to its bank. It lies there now,
half out of the water, its massive body absorbing the last warmth of the night air before the dew falls on its scales and the pre-dawn chill reaches even this cold-blooded ancient. It will not move for some time. It will lie there, motionless, as the sky lightens around it, and it will begin the long morning of thermoregulation, absorbing the first warming rays of the rising sun with the same patient competence with which it has done everything else throughout this night. The marsh breathes. In the open water, the bass have descended from the surface to the cooler, deeper water, where they will spend the warming hours of the day. The water snakes have retreated to their sheltering rocks and root tangles and debris piles along the bank. The crayfish have moved back under their stones. The dragonfly nymphs are settled on the bottom, their nocturnal activity complete. The water column, which was so alive with movement through the dark hours, is beginning to quiet, not because life has left it, but because it is changing shifts, the night workers returning to their rest as the day workers begin to stir. Water remembers. And then, from the trees at the eastern edge of the marsh, from the direction of the sky that is now distinctly, undeniably lightning, a bird sings. It is a robin, an American robin, one of the most reliably early risers in the dawn chorus, who has positioned itself high in a dead elm snag at the marsh's edge and is now singing, tentatively at first, as if testing the air, as if making sure the night is actually ending before committing fully a few phrases of its rich, melodic song. It pauses. Silence. It sings again, a little longer this time, a little more confident. The sky to the east is pale now, a thin line of lighter gray above the tree line, distinguishable from the darkness only by its very slightly different quality of darkness. But it is enough. The robin has read it correctly. Stillness settles. A song sparrow answers from somewhere in the cattails, a brief, bright phrase, questioning, as if confirming what the robin has announced. Then a cardinal, somewhere back in the shrubby woodland edge, begins its own clear, carrying song. Then a red-winged blackbird, descending from its night roost, delivers its emphatic buzzy call from the top of a cattail, a call so familiar to the marsh's daylight hours that its reappearance now feels like the return of something that was only temporarily absent. The amphibian chorus thins further. The spring peepers, those faithful, infatigable singers who began this symphony so many hours ago, are calling now only in scattered, isolated voices. Each call seems both continuous with all the calls that preceded it through the long night, and somehow final, a last note held as long as it can be before it must be released. The marsh breathes. The sky is blue now, not the deep star-filled blue-black of an hour ago, but a paler, cooler, more certain blue. The blue of early morning before the sun has cleared the horizon, a color that belongs to no other time of day. In it, the last stars are fading, not gone, not for another 20 minutes, but dimming, becoming uncertain, losing the hard brilliance of the deep night and softening into suggestions of themselves. A great blue heron appears. It comes from the same direction the night herons went, from the direction of the cedar grove, though it roosted in a different tree, a taller one, from which it has watched the sky lighten with the same quiet attention it brings to everything. Now it descends on great slow wings toward the marsh's edge, landing with a careful, deliberate step in exactly the shallows where the black-crowned night heron stood for so many hours through the night. It steps slowly, one foot placed with infinite care before the other. Its long neck folds and unfolds as it scans the water below. The day shift has begun. Water remembers. The mist is thinner now, still present, still drifting across the surface in long, slow sheets, but less substantial than it was at midnight, its upper edges catching the first light and going translucent, almost luminous. Where it lies thickest, over the deepest part of the open water, it still holds the quality of mystery, of concealment, of all the things the night has gathered and now is slowly releasing. The last bullfrog calls. Jug a rum. A pause, longer than any pause in the last several hours. And then silence. Not the silence of something ended, but the silence of something that has arrived at its natural completion. The silence at the end of a long exhalation. Stillness settles. A single robin is singing now from the elm snag with full voice and full confidence. The sort of singing that needs no qualification, no tentativeness, no question. The day is here. The singer knows it. The marsh knows it. Even the mist, thinning in the very first warmth of the indirect light above the horizon, knows it. Everything has played its part. The spring peepers that called all night, those tiny, irrepressible voices. The patient night herons. The bass hunting in the dark water below the surface. The crickets counting out the temperature in their slow, faithful way. The fireflies with their cold, beautiful light. The water snake working the margins. The snapping turtle on the bottom. The alligator in the southern darkness, ancient and still. All of them present, all of them necessary, all of them part of the single, continuous living thing that is this marsh, in this night, in this endless turning of the world from dark to light and back again. The marsh breathes. The robin sings. The great blue heron takes another step in the shallows, its pale eye intent on the water below. The mist releases the last of the night from its soft, silver hands, and the marsh, this ancient, breathing, dreaming, endlessly patient place, hands the watch quietly to the day. Water remembers, as it always has, as it always will. Epilogue. The day arrived. The night is done, But the marsh is not. It never is. While you were sleeping, were drifting in that warm, soft country between sleeping and waking, it continued. The frog called one last time and fell silent. The firefly traced its final arc above the mist and was gone. The alligator settled on its bank and closed its ancient eyes, and the water closed over the last small disturbance its movement had made, and was smooth again. And the day arrived as it always arrives, without fanfare, without announcement, step by careful step, the way a great blue heron wades through shallow water. The marsh breathes. This is the truth the wetland offers to anyone patient enough to stay through the night and receive it, that there is no ending here, no full stop, only a long, continuous sentence punctuated by dawn and dusk, by the chorus of spring and the silence of winter, by the call of a single bird in the blue hour before sunrise and the answering call of a world waking up. You have traveled through it, the threshold and the chorus and the patience of the fishers and the dark water and the singing insects and the ancient reptiles and the slow, inevitable turning back toward morning. You have traveled through a night in the wetland and arrived here at the other side. Water remembers, and something in you remembers too. Something quiet, something that recognized itself in the stillness of the heron, in the patience of the bass, in the small, courageous song of the peeper, calling out into the enormous darkness and trusting, always trusting, that the darkness is not empty. It never is. Stillness settles. The marsh will be here tomorrow night, and the night after that. It has always been here, breathing, remembering, holding the dark and the light and everything in between, gently, without condition, without end. The marsh breathes, and so do you. Rest now.